Are you ready to start homeschooling? If you're a family of color and you've only been looking at the resources available by Googling how to start homeschooling, the answer is probably no. Welcome to Homeschool Yourself. I'm your host, Delina. In this episode, we're talking to Elan Page, homeschool coach and founder of Homeschool Our Way. We're talking to her about what considerations families of color need to consider when beginning their homeschool journey. I had a couple of if I could do it over again moments in this episode. I hope it helps you craft an amazing homeschool life for you and your kids. Take a listen. Hi, Elan. How are you? I'm so glad you're here to have a conversation with me. Would you tell my audience a little bit about yourself?
Delina, thank you for having me on your podcast. I'm so excited for you in this new format that you're able to reach folks with. I'm Elan. I'm a homeschool mom of two, and I have a business called Homeschool Our Way, which helps families of color get started homeschooling.
Tell me your why. Why is it important for you to help families get started homeschooling?
When I was coming up, so I was born and raised in Dallas, in the suburbs of Dallas. I went to a small Christian school, a small white Christian school. And we actually had a lot of homeschoolers who would come, they would either take electives at our school or they would be involved in the sports at our school. And so I was like very familiar with a lot of homeschool families, but none of those homeschool families look like mine. And so I feel like it's a very common thing in the white, especially white Christian world. But for those of us, families of color, it's a newer thing for us. And a lot of us have, because we haven't had sort of decades, years, generations of educating our kids this way, we have a lot of questions. We have a lot of questions like, well, what is it supposed to look like? And our families oftentimes are also set up differently. I know in my own family, we're two working parents. And I never saw that with my white counterparts. It was always like a stay-at-home mom and then a parent who worked outside the home. And so we have, as families of color, we have different reasons for choosing to homeschool. Our families often look different. And so we just need, I feel like at this moment in time, as homeschool is gaining popularity and it's really becoming a way of educating our kids, it's so beneficial to us as Black families. We just need some help getting started and kind of getting set up for success.
Yes. All of the generic advice does not apply to us,
It does
and does
not.
not apply to us in the same way. I love that. I love that you're serving families of color. So, like you said, homeschooling in families of color is gaining ground. Like people are gravitating to homeschooling so much. Well, I imagine that more and more of them are coming to you for help. So I want to talk to you a little bit about the trends that you've noticed with families of color that you've helped. So what kind of things do they come to you for, and what kind of questions do they have? What do you help them answer?
Yeah, I think that the two biggest things that I see time and time again are how do we find community and how do we find curriculum? Those are two of the big things that like parents as they're getting started, and I was one of those parents, right, who worried about those two things, especially. Families, parents want to know that their kids aren't missing out on anything. So that community piece is very important. Where will my kids find friends? How will they be interacting with their peers and learning with their peers on a regular basis? Even as parents, where are the other Black homeschool parents? Like where can I find supports in those ways? So I think that community piece is very important, especially if, for example, maybe you don't live in an urban area, or maybe you live in an area that doesn't have a ton of Black families. Where can you find your people? Where can you find your tribe? And so that's very important. The other piece with the curriculum, and thank you for creating woke homeschooling and for giving us products like Oh Freedom, because it's important for a lot of us that our kids are learning truth, right? That they are learning things that are actual and factual, as TLC said. And so that's a priority. The other priority, though, is just making sure that our kids are nurtured in what they are learning, that they see themselves in it. So that the characters and the books that they read not only look like them, but come from families and experiences that mirror their own. And so we don't always get that in the traditional school system, right? Like I feel like it has to be a very specialized, very unique experience to be able to get that in a traditional school, but we can absolutely create that in our world of homeschooling. And so a lot of times families are coming in with the question, okay, like I kind of have an idea of what's missing, but how do I find the resources to fill what I want my child's education to look like?
Yeah. What what are some of the things that surprise them about the homeschooling world? Because it's like stepping into a different world altogether, coming from a, a school system and into
Absolutely.
homeschool.
It is. I think one of the things that I've always find funny is that when parents transition into homeschooling and they think that they need to recreate traditional school at home,
Yes, yes.
then it looks like, well, oh my gosh, what do I find to fill my kid's day for 8 hours? And I'm
Mm-hmm.
always like, who told you need to do that? That's not necessary. You don't have to do
Yeah.
that. So they start to see learning that can happen in different ways. It doesn't have to look like sitting
Mm-hmm.
behind a desk and sitting in a classroom, for 8 hours. It doesn't have to be on worksheets. It could
Mm-hmm.
be, so I'll give you an example. Right now, as we're recording, it is Hispanic Heritage Month. And so one of the things that we've been learning a lot about are people of African descent who are either born and raised in Latin America or are American and with Latin American lineage. And my children and I have lots of rich discussions about this. So yes, there are books that we read, there might be videos that we watch, but the learning, I'm not sticking a worksheet in front of them
Yeah.
necessarily to test to see what
Yeah.
they recall. We're having rich discussions as a family to reinforce what it is that they're learning. And that might be last week in particular, I can guarantee it was in the car on the way to volleyball practice that we were having this discussion.
Yeah.
So it's not like I wasn't like, okay, it's 8:30 a.m. It's time for us to do our, Hispanic heritage lesson and
Mm-hmm.
we're going to sit here and do these workshops. No, it was like I was on a call for work. They were watching a video and then they read a chapter in a book that we got from the library. And then like I said, later that afternoon, we had our discussion in the car on the way to something else. There's learning happening all the time. And
All
I
the
think that that
time.
really surprises parents that like, oh, look at this flexibility. Look at this
Yeah.
flexibility that we can truly have a hand in our kids' education anytime, anywhere.
I love that. I love that. It's kind of hard to find that rhythm because it always keeps you questioning, am I doing enough? Are they going to be on par with their peers that are in school? You feel like you have to do it that way. And that's one of the I'm here talking, but that's one of the ways I wish that education had changed with the pandemic because we don't have to do it that way. Like
We do
there's
not.
so many other ways. And homeschooling is such a gift to be able to do that with your own family, even when society's still stuck with one way of doing it.
It is. And really quickly to piggyback on what you just said, that's another thing that surprises parents is once they step fully into this homeschool thing, they're very surprised at how quickly their children are learning, right? And so that
Absolutely.
goes into exactly what you were just saying, Delina, about how like, oh, are my kids behind? Are they, do I need to get them caught up? The one-on-one instruction or the instruction that your child gets with you or with an instructor that you've brought in to help with whatever that is, it's so specialized for your child that they are going to catch on that much quicker. And so I really think that as if a parent is transitioning from traditional school and perhaps their child was a little bit behind, let's say at the end of one school year their child was behind, and then maybe they work with them a little bit over the summer, by the time we get to the fall of the next school year, I think parents are shocked at how much progress has
Yeah.
happened with just a couple months of being able to work one-on-one with your child.
Yeah. Parent magic, the one on one special magic.
I love that parent magic. Yes.
What kind of support do you see that families of color need the most?
I think that, again, I go back to that community piece. That
Mm-hmm.
community thing is very important for us. And here's why. A lot of times, and I can say this about my upbringing. Remember, I said I went to a small
Mm-hmm.
Christian school and
In
me
Texas.
in Texas. And the people at the school who looked like me were also related to me. So literally, it was me, my brother, my cousins. We made up the Black student population.
My goodness, we're going to let in one family.
That's right. That's right. And so there were a few others. I'm exaggerating slightly, but for the most part, we were holding it down. But here's the deal. There are things that now 30, 20 years later, like whatever, that I look at And I see that even though my parents meant well, there have been some lasting marks on me from having had that experience. I think about things even like, I remember I was in high school and I remember it was the first class of the day and we had like announcements that would come on or whatever. And we would have like some students or whatever who would read morning announcements for the whole school. During the month of February, students would read a Black history fact. And I remember one day in particular in my AP biology class, the Black history fact was read, and immediately, as soon as they finished that Black history fact, several of my white classmates were like, "Who cares?" And it was two of
No.
us, two Black folks in that class, me, and then one young lady who was Nigerian American. And so there is yes, there were two Black people in the classroom, but there was only one of us whose history was just
Mm-hmm.
disrespected in that
Mm-hmm.
way. And there is something that happens to a child when we are in such an unsafe space,
Mm-hmm.
because what can I do? I looked to my blonde-haired, blue-eyed teacher and she was like, she
Oh.
was just like, "Oh well, it happens." I'm looking to my other Black classmate who is Nigerian and she's offended but in a very different way. And then I'm looking to all the rest of my white classmates and they really don't care. Even though they didn't shout it out, they don't care
Mm-hmm.
either. I don't want my children to ever
Mm-hmm.
be in an environment like that, not as they're growing up. Now, the
Mm-hmm.
world is the world. And once they
Mm-hmm.
begin to be adults, that happens. But I want them to be, for now, in a nurturing environment, in a
Yes.
safe environment where they can be loved and affirmed and educated. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think that I go back to finding community that will do those things, nurture, affirm, and educate, is so important. It's so important. So I think that if I were to pick the single thing that is the most important way that Black families can and should be supported in their homeschool journey, it's finding community. It's that important to me.
Absolutely. Yeah. I feel like we all have stories like that and it
We
makes
do.
me it does something inside of me to hear it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
What questions do you think that families of color should think about when they're thinking about homeschooling? Like what hasn't dawned on them yet because they're new to this world?
Well, in my mind, there are 5 key things. And I actually have a little like guide that I created based on these 5 things. So I think that first of all, you need to know your family's goals. What do you want to get out of this experience? Like, what do you want it to not only look like
Mm,
in the present, but what do you want the outcome to be in the future with your kiddos and with your entire family? So thinking with the end in mind, I
I
think
love
is very
that.
important. Yeah. And then the second thing is understanding, we all live in different states, understanding what your state's laws are regarding homeschooling.
Hmm.
Because Delina, what we are able to do here in Texas looks very different than a family who lives in New Jersey.
Hmm.
And so you want to make sure that you get off on the right start because you don't want anybody, knocking at your
Knocking on your
door.
door.
Yes, like you don't want that. But then you also don't want a situation where your child is not able to do something because you did something incorrectly. So, for example, if they're college bound and you are helping them apply for college and they don't have something, maybe in your state school, they don't have something that was needed because you didn't know. So you just want to make sure that you get those pieces right from the very beginning. And I also think you need to think about, you don't have to make all the decisions about curriculum at one time, but I do think it pays to think about curriculum from the very beginning. What are you looking for in the
Hmm.
curriculum resources? And they don't have to all come from one place. I am a very eclectic homeschooler. I pull from a number of different sources, but I do have standards for everything that I'm looking at. I always want things to be, I cannot deal with problematic curriculum.
Hmm.
Like if you are going to in some way belittle people of color, I'm out. If you are somehow going to erase people of color, I'm out.
Hmm.
So there are those kinds of things that like I look at things through that lens. I also am a person of faith. And so there are certain in certain areas that I want my faith to come through in what I'm teaching my kiddos. And so whatever your standards are, whatever your goals are. That's why it's important to set those goals at the very beginning, because then you know what to look for when it comes time for curriculum, when it comes time for finding those learning resources. And then, I think too, like the fourth piece for me is understanding that our children are whole humans. Right. And
Yes.
so, yes, there's the academics, but then what else is your kid into?
Yeah.
Maybe they're into a certain area of academics that you want to explore more. Like maybe they are just a math whiz. And so you want to keep feeding that, right? Or maybe they're a writer. You want to get them maybe into writing clubs, writing workshops, that kind of thing. But then also, what are they into that's outside again of those academics? So are they into sports? Do they love building with their hands? Like what do they like, and what can we nurture? Because as we step into this world of homeschooling, we have a little more freedom. We have a little more flexibility, right? And so what are ways we can continue to pour into our whole child so that they are getting more than just their ABCs, one, two, threes?
Even to extend that a little bit, the kind of person that they are, the kind of like values that are important to them, like the things that we
Yes.
expose them to. I know it was important for me to know that my kids understand the news. So we would watch those kids news things on YouTube together, just the different things that you want for them to feel are important.
I'm so
Yeah.
glad you said that. We are actually right now, my children and I are doing some learning because it is an election year.
Oh,
And
yes.
so PBS Kids has some fantastic kids
Hmm.
resources, free, totally free, kids resources that help our kids understand our government here in the United States and
Hmm.
how our officials are elected and that kind of thing. And so I think that piece is super important too, because I don't know that, like, yeah, I took a civics class in high school, and I did take some government and economics in high school, but it was in high school, right?
In high school, right?
Why do we need to wait to teach our kids about the world that they live in and how they can contribute as citizens of this world? Why should we have to wait until they get older? So that's another thing that we've been able to tap into. And yes, you're correct. That goes into them as a whole person and seeing themselves as a real important piece of the society.
And another one to add would be like chores. I know chores,
Yes.
but my kids are all teenagers now, and they're surprised at how many of their friends don't know how to do their laundry, or don't know how to cook a meal, or can't follow a recipe. Those things you have time for. I totally understand how when your kids are in school, the time you have at home is precious, and you don't necessarily, it's easier for you to do the laundry while they're at school or something. But
Hmm.
yes, teaching those life skills, you have time for that now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Because in traditional school, everything is rush, rush, rush. So yeah, the kids, I saw a lot of that too when I was a kid. Like you get to college and, and your,
Yes.
and your roommate doesn't know how to clean up behind themselves. What are we doing? What are we
Yes.
doing?
Yes. How do you think that bed got made when you were growing up?
Exactly. That's so funny. Well, the last piece, the fifth kind of step that I think that you should consider as you're starting homeschooling is again support. So yes,
Hmm.
that's support from a community standpoint, finding that for your kiddos. But then also, like I said earlier, as parents, we need that support too. And it doesn't all have to be in person, right? So like I have found a good deal of support. Delene, I think I found you online before
Yeah.
we had an opportunity to meet in person. I think that don't discount the virtual space. Get
Yes.
in groups like the one that you have, Delina, on Facebook, where you can share resources and you can
Yes.
talk to other parents and, maybe work through some things like, ooh, I'm struggling with X, Y, and Z. And then somebody clear in another state that you've never met in person is able to shoot you a few things and say, my child was having the same struggles. Try this, this, and this, and see if that
Yes.
helps. That is truly, truly a form of support that is truly needed. And I don't want people to overlook that.
Yes, absolutely. Share and be open to learning from other people that are doing the same thing you're doing. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
So let's talk a little bit about when you started homeschooling. What motivated your pivot into homeschooling?
My kiddos, specifically my older daughter, because she was already in kindergarten, I think when COVID
Mhm.
started. And so it was that school year that all the kids had to come home from school,
Mhm.
right? It was cut short. And so my child was doing virtual schooling. So the school where she was, again, a small white private school. You think I would have learned,
You
but
did it again.
I did
You're
it
repeating the
again. That's so funny. So anyway, so she comes home, but I will say this: her school was far more diverse than mine was. She had a Black teacher, and her kindergarten year, and I remember telling her, I said, Kira, you don't understand right now how important and how exciting this is. I said, but I never had that until I got to high
Yeah.
school. So I was like, just know that mommy's excited that you have Miss Dawson was her name, that you have Miss Dawson. She was a sweet lady, is a sweet lady. She hadn't gone anywhere.
Okay.
But
I was like,
anyway,
oh no,
but
COVID got her.
no, it did not. It did not. She's doing fine. But no, so what happens is the kiddos come home from school and Miss Dawson and all the other teachers, they're doing classes virtually, right? And what I was noticing is that my daughter was finishing her work very quickly. And then she was kind of sitting around and kind of fidgeting and kind of like, looking for something else to do. And I remembered that there was a parent teacher conference that I'd had with Miss Dawson that was something stuck out to me. And it didn't make sense until months later that she would say, well, Kira, she's my little helper. She does this and that in the class for me. And she helps me with the other kids and blah, blah, blah. And in my mind at the time, I was just thinking, oh, well, she's a leader. Well, then, because, I was proud from that standpoint. The kid was bored. The kid was bored because she was finishing her work. And I saw this firsthand when the kiddos came home, during COVID. And so that summer, my husband and I talked about it. It was just like, let's try this homeschool thing. Like, let's go into it. The kids, we weren't really comfortable with sending them because then at the time, my baby girl would have been going into preschool. And
Okay.
so that's sending two kids to a school where folks may or may not be wearing masks and things were just very uncertain at that time. So I was like, okay, so we're going to do homeschooling. And what happened for me was all of the questions, all the things, Delina, that we've been talking about, these were all of the things that were in my head that summer, trying to solve for, well, are we going to do some virtual classes? And what do we do for curriculum? And I've spent all this money on this box curriculum that was like all the subjects. So I was like, it just needs to be easy because I'm still working and I can't be bothered, and wasted a good $900,
Shoot.
good of my hard-earned money. So anyway, made some mistakes, but ultimately what was exciting was the progress. Again, I talked about that progress with their learning, the progress that I saw in both kids as they were learning from home. I was like, oh, this is special. I think we've tapped into something really, really special. So when they did have to end up going back to traditional school, maybe like a year later, just because I was the problem. my job, I was just very busy at the time, very demanding. And so when we though could revisit homeschooling, then we absolutely did that because the seed that was planted in me was seeing those children thrive as they were learning at home. And I was like, I want to get back to that.
Oh, I love that. I love that. What ideas or beliefs did you have about homeschooling that it turned out not to be true?
Well, I thought to myself at the beginning, I'm going to be the only working mom and nobody's going to understand. And do I have to hide that I work? And I don't so silly. And that's how, like, as I got out into, the real homeschool world, I was like, I'm not alone in this at all. There are so many of us who work a full-time job, either for someone else or we're entrepreneurs ourselves, whatever that might look like. There are different ways to be able to do this. It does not have to be a work from home parent who does all of the educating of the kids. And I was really shocked. Don't tell him I said this. I was really shocked at how hands-on my husband is in this whole homeschooling thing. He is right there. Even like right now, he's on a field trip with them right now as we speak. And it is very much a team effort. And so that's been super important, not only for, the actual function of making sure that the kids are educated, but allowing my girls to not just hear from me and not just, interact with me from an education standpoint, but to be able to share that experience with their dad too, I think is super important. And for us to be able to do it together as a family, that's been great.
I love that. Did you have to sell him on homeschooling or did he see that same growth in them during that time?
Not only did he see the same growth, but what I think is always funny is he and I were both thinking about homeschooling silently. We had not said anything to one another until that summer, of 2020, when COVID was happening, we were trying to figure out what to do for the next school year. And so he was the first person to say something. He was like, well, what if we homeschool? So I always have to give him the credit that it wasn't that he had to get me on board, but he was the first one to say it out loud. And so we were on the same page and we went ahead and went for it.
I love that. When did you realize, in all this process that you had more freedom. It wasn't just like, how are we going to do this during the pandemic? But you had freedom to homeschool your way.
I think that there are two things that are very important. So first off, I go back to 2020 when we first started homeschooling, and that was when Joe Biden and Kamala Harris were elected. And so to have our first woman and person of color vice president that my children could see. We watched inauguration together, that we were able to see. And I was able to incorporate that into their learning. There was also, I think the young lady's name is Amanda Gordon or Gorman, who is a poet, a young poet, very young. She was just a young lady at the time. She's an adult now, but she spoke at inauguration. And my older daughter, who then was about 7, I think, she was taking a poetry class, an online poetry class at the time. And so she got to see in real life a young lady just a few years older than her who was doing the thing that she was studying. And there were just so many more instances of how I could educate and pour into my kiddos at the same time in ways that they never, ever, ever were going to get in traditional school, especially not the traditional school that they were in. Just being able to do Black history outside of February. Imagine that. Being able to learn about notable Black figures that weren't the standard, MLK and that kind of thing. I loved all that. I was like, this is very, very cool. But I also think getting to teach them in the ways that they receive information was so important. So their learning styles. I have one child who is very much an auditory learner, and then I have one child who is very much a reading, writing learner. And so, yes, there are times when I will show them a video or that we will do hands-on projects and that kind of thing. But just understanding that I have one kid that I can pop a podcast on, and let her listen to that. And she's going to soak in all that information and knowing that that is her preferred method. So she has her headphones near her computer always. Like that's her, that's her way. Whereas the other one, my reading writing learner, she has journals upon journals upon journals because she likes to write and she likes to, she'll take in the information, but she needs to also write it back out so that that's how she processes. And so just understanding how your kid, I cannot even express this enough, how your kids receive information, how they best receive information is so important. That's truly, again, how you're going to see that progress with your kiddos fast when you're not trying to force them to do something that they're not created to do. You're not trying to force a visual learner to be, an auditory learner or like whatever that looks like. When you embrace how they naturally learn, you'll see them go so much further, so much faster.
Yes. And for them to even know that about themselves at this age, this is how I learn. This is how information sticks in my head. This is how, that's such a valuable tool for the rest of their life.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I have one last question for you. How do you homeschool yourself? How do you stay on this learning path?
Well, I will tell you what, I didn't do it on purpose, but this is a perfect segue into how I homeschool myself because I actually, a couple years ago, I took what is called a Strengths Finders test and learned that my number one learning style or my number one strength is learning.
Okay.
I love to learn.
Love it.
I absolutely love to learn. And I think that's why I'm so passionate about homeschooling and about kids being able to learn. But what is interesting is exactly what you just said, Delina, that I got that information and I use it now on a regular basis. So my top 5 strengths were like learning, visionary, strategic, and some other things. And so whether it's in my 9-to-5 job or my job with Homeschool Our Way, or whether it's how I prepare, learning activities and things like that for my kiddos, I think about these things. I think about what drives me and how I like to operate. And there are certain things I do not like. I don't like building. I don't like whatever. But I do love, again, strategy is one of my key strengths. I love to think about what could be, like the vision, like the, that kind of thing. And so how that plays out sometimes in our homeschool world is I will plan the semester and the year. This is what the kiddos will learn. These are the experiences that we'll have, that kind of thing, because that is super exciting to me. My husband will come in. He's the fun parent. And so he'll come in and with the activities and, like I said, the field trip that they're on today, those kinds of things, that's his strength. And so what I learned is to embrace our strengths and not work against our strengths. And that learning actually is what led me to, I have like a little quiz that I give parents who work with me that is called the Learning Styles Quiz. The fact that I learned my top 5 strengths is what led me to create a tool that will help parents find the ways that their kid best likes to learn. Like that one thing transitioned into the other thing. And so it's just a constant like learning, but to learn oneself is so important. So I'm just on a journey to continue to learn myself and to help others learn themselves. I think it's super important.
I love that. And let us know how we can get in touch with you.
Sure. Well, you'll find me on Instagram, homeschool_our way, because somebody else had Homeschool Our Way. So don't find them, find me. You'll see my little brown face. So you'll find me there. I also have a podcast called Homeschool Our Way. And if you want any more details about those kind of 5 steps as you're getting into homeschooling, you can find that at homeschoolourway.com/start.
Beautiful, beautiful. And I will add that to the show notes.
Appreciate that.
Thank you so much, Elan. I love this conversation with you, and I love how you're helping other parents get on this homeschooling journey. It's a beautiful, beautiful space to be in.
It really is. I love it so much, and I am cheering on all of the parents who are either looking to get into this space or are in this space now. You're doing what is an amazing thing for your kiddos, and I think that you'll see it pay off.
I love that. Thank you.
I love that in this conversation, Elan inspired us to rethink some of the ideas we have about what schooling is and what our homeschooling life could look like. May it inspire you to look for community and step into homeschool freedom. To connect with Elan, head over to our show notes, wokehomeschooling.com/podcast, where there are links to her social media and her website.
Homeschool Yourself is a production of Woke Homeschooling, Inc. For show notes and links to things mentioned in the episode, visit wokehomeschooling.com/podcast. Woke Homeschooling empowers parents to teach their kids an inclusive, truthful history. We invite you to visit our website and download a sample of the history curriculum we offer for kids. Visit us at wokehomeschooling.com.